Buenas, bienvenidos a este vídeo de unplandivino.net. Digo siempre porque lo voy a colgar ahí en Un Plan Divino, que es como se llama el canal en YouTube, y la web tiene esa asociada, la que hice hace unos años, y estamos con Claudia para ir terminando ya este taller tan bonito de la ética y la moral, estas palabras que tanto nos asustan, sobre todo moral, porque las han malversado, digamos, por así decir. Bueno, ¿qué tal en Argentina? Ya no ha pasado más de un rato desde que hemos terminado de grabar la anterior parte de ética y moral, y en esta hay mucho jugo que comentar, como veremos. Dime, ¿estás vivo?
Sí, sí, gracias, Iván.
Gracias.
No solo viva, sino también como sorprendida cada vez que partimos y cómo los presupuestos o los pensamientos, como dice AJ, que no han sido sometidos a experimentación y los tomamos los creemos, digamos, válidos, le damos validez porque desde la primera experiencia que tuve a través de la verdad divina, con la ética y moral, pasamos por tantas cosas que me sigue sorprendiendo. Así me encontré con el dinero, bueno, ahora un poco con esta ira con los hombres. Bueno, si bien ahora sabemos que todo está relacionado intrínsecamente, pero maravilloso, maravilloso empezar a abrir.
Pues el anterior justo trataba de eso, de miedos secundarios, miedos primarios. Estamos ahí a veces empecinados con, ay, mi ley de la atracción con el dinero, no sé qué, para no mirar miedos a las relaciones, por ejemplo, como le pasaba a Elvira, que nos está haciendo un gran servicio, Elvira, ¿no? Con su honestidad y eso.
Sí, muy, para mí sorprendente, por eso me quedo como que descubriendo. Sí, maravilloso, gracias.
Bueno, pues gracias y vamos para esta parte, también con algunas sorpresas, esperemos. O sea, si no lo habéis escuchado antes, estas cosas son muy sorprendentes, lo que nos vamos a encontrar. Vale, vamos para allá.
Now, let's proceed with the second half of this discussion, shall we? Which is the issue of morality. So what I would like to do is define morality quite loosely for you, which is this: treat others and yourself how God wants each all his children going ahead of myself here, to be treated. So with the first thing, with the ethics, if you like, the first thing here, treating other people how I would like to be treated myself would be, as you can see from our previous discussion, would confront a lot of areas of our life and would help us become far more ethical and loving in our behaviour towards each other. You can see that? This one here, of course, is now an extension of that. We're now extending that into how does God want all of her children to be treated? That's how I need to treat everyone else and myself, actually, how God wants all of her children to be treated. So actually, you are out of harmony with morality even if you treat yourself how God doesn't want you to be treated. While you may be in harmony with ethics, you are out of harmony with morality. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah. Now, this issue is a very, very big issue because, firstly, we need to then make we need to have some feelings about how God wants all of her children to be treated. don't we? Now, of course, many religions have done that emotionally, and intellectually they've done that, and they finish up treating people very badly. In fact, wars have been created about how religions believe God wants them to treat another religion, for example. Complete wars have been created about that. But of course, these two points are not mutually exclusive. Do you know what I mean by mutually exclusive? We're not saying you can do that without doing that, or do that without doing that. So, if I had this viewpoint,
aquí, claro, se sobreentiende solo la moral equivocada de lo que ellas creen que es. Ahora lo vemos. Que despista el título.
inside of myself, that God wanted me to punish other people for not being of the same religious faith that I am. Let's say I had that viewpoint and I believe that to be true. Asking myself the first question would confront that viewpoint, because I wouldn't want to be punished myself for having a different religion than another person. So how can I then justify treating another person badly because of having a different religious faith than myself? So we need to add both of these two statements together to create what would be loving action towards other people. Does that make sense? Unfortunately, most religions do this only. The reason why I raised the first issue with religions in the first century is because most religions do this bit that I've done a ringer around here. And they make a lot of suppositions about how God or what God wants without any consideration to the first ethical issue. Can you see that? In other words, what they do is they say, oh, God wants me to, expel homosexuals from my congregation. That's what it says in the Bible, so that's what we're doing. But if they ask themselves, would they like to be expelled as a heterosexual from the congregation? They'd probably say, well, no, I wouldn't like to be expelled for anything that I'm doing from a congregation. So how can they then justify the second statement as to what God wants? Does that make sense? And the reality is, one of the things God wants is for us to do the first thing. So that's what we also need to bear in mind. God wants us to only consider treating other people how we would like to be treated. That's one of the things God also wants. Because obviously, once we ask ourselves that first question, we have the capacity to understand what kind of treatment most of us are able to accept and what kind of treatment is unloving, that we can't accept. But this second issue is very important, and the reason why I raise it as morality rather than ethics is because normally what happens on the planet is that people decide what's moral and what's not. Make sense? That's what people do. People do it. What I'm suggesting is the only person who has the right to tell us what's right and what's wrong is God. And I'm not saying he's going to do that in a book that people have written, because that's open to interpretation and misinformation and also falsification. He's going to have to do it by having some kind of communication with your heart, is the way that it's going to have to work. Some kind of communication with your heart. So, issues of morality include issues such as Is lying right or wrong? Is stealing right or wrong? Right? Is embezzlement, how do you spell it? Is that right? No, it's not good enough, it's just close enough. Is it 1 Z or 2? 2 Zs? Is it EL? So, embezzlement. And is that right or wrong? From whose perspective? You know, from God's perspective. What about adultery? What about what the Bible calls fornication, which is really just two people who are unmarried having sex or so forth? What about homosexuality? And so forth. We can continue listing things like to do with sex as well, masturbation and so forth. We can list all of these different things. In the end, the person who determines whether any of those things are what? Are right or wrong would be the person who created us for the purpose that he created us or she created us. So, if we examine the purpose for which we were created, that is a fast way of determining what might be, what that person might be interpreting as what's right or what's wrong. So it's a bit like a person who creates a knife. Do you think their intention originally, the person who creates a knife, was that it's used in a murder? No. So, because a knife has other roles, doesn't it? Like you can cut up food and you need it for doing all sorts of things. So a knife, while it has the potential to be used in an unloving manner to harm, physically hurt or even destroy a person's life, or a loving manner to cut up food and help you eat and to see, then you can see that a person who created the thing, their intention is involved in what its underlying use is. Now, if we examine that with regard to a knife, we could then go, okay, and there is either a loving use of a knife or an unloving use of a knife. The loving use of a knife is to help people in their life. Another unloving use of a knife would be to hinder people with their life. That would be an unloving use of a knife. Now, there has been people who create a knife just to injure people. A certain type of knife which is created just to harm people. So what's their intention? It's unloving intention, because their intention is to harm. How about a gun? Can you think?
Intentar quitar un poco de ruido de fondo por la ventana.
Of any loving use? You can't. You can?
Aquí creo que ha dicho que no lo ha recogido la transcripción, que no puedes. O sea, como que Miller quería proponerles, no puedes pensar en algún uso amoroso. Pero bueno, ahora una participante, veamos.
If we get the microphone, sorry. Thanks, sir.
Depends on your degree of loving, but there are people that use guns for sport, so they're target, as in actual target, not to kill something.
Okay, so they're using it for the fun, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you could say that is a loving use of a knife, could you? Of a gun? Well, what's the difference between that and using a football? There's not much difference, is there?
No.
No. Everyone's a bit more fearful about guns. So potentially might be loving uses of a gun. Might be potentially loving uses of a gun. For example, I gave a talk recently about the use of free will, and in that talk I suggested to people that under certain circumstances, firing a gun at another person, not to kill them, but to prevent them from acting, might actually be a loving thing to do if it's done with the right action and the right intention. Right? And so, there is a potential loving use of a gun, potentially. I'm not sure if there's a potential loving use of an atomic warhead, anything like that. Because mass destruction there. It's not selective. Anything that is selective has a potential loving use generally. Does that make sense? Anything that's selective has a potential loving use. And of course, most of the time, there is a unloving use, isn't there, of a weapon like a gun? Turning it into a weapon rather than something else. So another unloving use of a gun would be to shoot animals with, another unloving use of a gun, and so forth. Okay. So when we say unloving and loving, who defines that? Because I'm sure a person who goes out shooting every weekend feels that they are still being loving. So can you see it has to be outside of the definition of any human, and the definition has to be related to somebody else, basically. And the best person who defines how the knife is to be used is its maker. Does that make sense? Okay.
Is that also because inherent in the way they make the thing?
Yes.
Is for its optimal use?
Yes.
Like if someone's creating a samurai sword, they're creating it with the whole way they design the thing is to achieve, like, I don't know, battle or death. Whereas if I'm designing a knife that's for cutting up carrots, but I'll design it completely differently, won't I?
Although this person who designed a samurai sword could have the intention that they want to artistically move their body and display some kind of martial arts, and that's why it's called martial arts, right? Some kind of martial arts in a way that demonstrates control and how they're not afraid of the weapon itself, and it can actually demonstrate some quite amazing principles to watch. Yeah. So the person who makes that one obviously has a different intention.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm asking about, though, is the design, the maker's intention.
Yes.
Affects the design.
Certainly. Which
affects the optimal functioning of that thing.
Certainly.
Which I'm applying to the human soul and God.
Of course. So let's now apply. Apply this properly to the human soul and the human body. So we rub all that out. So we apply this same principle. The maker of our human soul is God. He's also the maker of the human body, right? And the spirit body as well. All of the potential genetic designs that come from the amalgamation of two halves of the genetic process all came from this maker, which we are calling God, right? Surely then, God knows the optimal use of the soul and the optimal use of the bodies attached to the soul. That makes sense, wouldn't it? And so it would make sense then that if we could find out the optimal use based on how God wants us to use our body and our soul, then we can bring our life into complete harmony with God's morality, or how God designed us to be. Now, the problem with this second section, though, is that we need to remember yesterday's discussion, how we talked about the things that we are unsure of, we need to experiment with. The things that we're sure of will become clear through the process of experimentation. Does that make sense? Okay. So what we need to do with regard to these issues is we need to examine how society have experimented with the issues of morality and the general effects of these issues on society and the pain that it's created in society, and therefore we can measure the results of these society experiments that have been created. And therefore we can see what the optimal usage of our body and our spirit body and our soul can be by examining the results of its use over thousands of years of time. Does that not make sense? So let's look at our physical body. So we've got the male's physical body and the female's physical body. If the male or the female decide to have unprotected, which remember from the beginning, God didn't design prophylactics, right? And God didn't design any other form of contraception, right? That we know of as a human race at this point. That being the case, that if we decided to all not use any protection at all with our body, which has been done in the past, and we decided to have lots and lots of sexual partners, what has been the result? Let's list the results. What kind of diseases? So STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. Yep. Unwanted children. Yeah, what else? So it's a sexually transmitted disease, yeah. Abortions, yes, because of the unwanted pregnancy, there's also been abortions, which is the taking of an unborn child's life, yes. Entrapment, there's been an entrapment of, say, the woman wanting to marry somebody, they get pregnant, have a child, and they say it's yours. Now there's a feeling of the guy feels trapped. Yeah. Why is divorce? Please explain. Oh, okay. So broken relationships, let's call it that. I would argue that broken relationships are caused by other things, mind you, not just the act of sex. Yes. But when we use this sexual connection between a male and a female, or between a female and a female, or between a male and a male, we get a lot of results. And many of these results, if it's done in an unprotected manner, like there's no condoms or anything to protect you from these results, these are the results that occur. Now, what I would do with that is I go, okay, if these are the results that occur as a result of us acting in a certain behaviour with the sexual organs we've been given, then it would make sense that since all of these things result in one main thing, and that is pain, it would make sense then that many of us, or most of us in some times past perhaps, have used these sexual organs in a way that is not loving and therefore not in harmony. The fact that it creates pain means that it's not loving, and the fact that it creates pain means it must not be in harmony with our original design. Does that make sense? Yeah. And if it's not in harmony with our original design, we can certainly say through the process of experience, through the process of investigating the history of man, we can certainly say that certain actions can't be how God wants his children to be treated, because how we've treated each other has caused so much pain. Can you see that? Okay. So we can then start going, okay, so we understand the relationship between the painful results and therefore certain things that must be not moral from God's perspective. Can you see that relationship? Well, let's also look at it from the other end. Let's look at the pleasurable results of having sex. You get some intimacy, yes, that's possible, isn't it? Yeah. The orgasm, which is a pleasurable result. You get a wanted pregnancy, which is an awesome result. The creation of another child of God, pregnancy. There's got to be more reasons, otherwise you wouldn't want to do it so often, right? So that's... It's fun, okay, it's fun, yeah. There's an expression of love, yeah, in there, so that's possible. Does that result from having sex? Isn't it something you need to know before you have sex, probably?
Aquí, como vemos, no se oye. Está la que está hablando aquí, parece. No tienen el micro muchas veces.
Well, yeah, if we took this to the furthest extension, the reality is that we could completely have a way of preventing a pregnancy, if we wanted to prevent pregnancy, by just controlling our own bodies. Yep. But let's look at what the results have been historically, rather than the results. We're talking about now the positive results historically that we can see from having sex. Yep, so growth in self-awareness, I feel that happens. Sharing of self, let's put it in there, sharing self, which is a very positive thing to do, is giving the gift of yourself to another person and the gift of your body to another person, to use in a loving manner, which is a very loving thing to do. Yeah? Trust and everything grows as a result, yeah. And there are even far more than that, if you think about it. There's all these issues with regard to soulmates as well, that you eventually open yourself up to experiencing. But let's just leave it like that. Let's say we don't believe in soulmates, so we leave it like that. Okay. So these are all the positive results of having sex. So obviously, from that we can see that God actually did design us to have sex. So it would not make sense to then go, oh, to be a holy person, that would require you to not have sex. Can you see that? Because obviously there's all these positive benefits from having sex. So now we've got to amalgamate the positives and the negatives together. Under what circumstances do the negatives occur is the question we need to ask ourselves. And under what circumstances do the positives occur? Right? And we need to merge those two things together. Therefore, we'll be able to have a good guess, although we may not know for certain, because we're not yet connecting with God, right? We may not know for certain, but we'll, from this experience, this experiment, this human experiment that's been going on that now 6.5 billion or 7 billion people are involved in, we can make some pretty good assumptions about what our original intention, what the original intention about our creation has been. Could we say this? If we amalgamate those two things together, what I'm putting to you is we can say a certain amount of fairly safe things as to what God intended us to do, compared to, if we don't even believe in soulmates at this point, what God intended us to do with regard to our sexual relationships. First thing, have sex. God intended us to do that because we would not have been given sexual organs and then are being asked to not use them. It's a crazy proposition to assume that that would be the case. So firstly, God designed us to have sex. But God designed us to have sex with one partner, because the more partners we involve in sex, the more potential there is for hurt, and the more potential there is for unwanted pregnancies, and the more potential there is for disease. Does that make sense? So that obviously is another thing. Now, I would extend some of these things with the knowledge that I've gained over other experiments, but once you look at the human experiment, you can make some fairly basic assumptions about God's original design. Any other things you can think of? When love is present. When love isn't present when you have sex, it's not very good for at least one party.
Is that marrying these two other things?
It's marrying together the positives and negatives that I put on the board just earlier. Yeah.
Ahí lo que ha preguntado ahí era simplemente repetir algo, por eso no viene en la transcripción y no lo...
Very good. Mutual agreement is necessary. Mutual, shall we call it mutual desire rather than just agreement? Because obviously agreement and desire are very different to each other. And so if one heart is not very keen on having sex and you get together and decide to acquiesce in the act, then of course the other party to the sex goes, wow, that wasn't very good sex, right? Because for sex to occur that's going to be really enjoyable, two parties need to have a strong desire for each other. Right? And when one party doesn't have much of a desire and the other one has a strong desire, the person with a strong desire often feels the lack of desire in the other party. The person who has a lower desire feels a bit oppressed upon, and so you get all of these unhappy emotions as a result. Yeah. So obviously mutual desire is a very, very key part. Yeah. Stuart? Maybe we should be using a mic here because we're not getting some of these comments. So, yeah.
To desire to have children and that you're going to love?
That if children result, then they are loved. Yep. Very important, isn't it? Yep. So this is before we factor in things like contraception and all these other things. Through this human experiment that's happened over thousands of years, we can make some of these basic assumptions about what appears to be the actual design of the designer who created our sexual organs.
I'm just wanting to ask a summary question now, which is about, you're saying that if there's pain resultant from a certain set of actions, then we have to consider that our designer didn't design us to experience pain.
Well, no, our designer designed us with the capability
Yes.
of experiencing pain as a feedback mechanism.
Yep.
But our designer didn't design us with the intention that we spent a whole life in pain.
Yes, so our designer created pain as a feedback mechanism.
Yes.
So
Telling us that something's wrong.
telling us that something's wrong.
Mm.
But also he designed us for pleasure and love.
Exactly, to
So-
tell us that something's right.
Yes.
Yes.
So this equation that you're going through with us is about how to discern what's moral, what our designer wanted from us,
Yes.
by examining the pain and the pleasure.
And not just our own pain, but the universal pain through the human experiment.
Exactly. Who else is suffering, or
Who else is suffering,
yeah.
and so forth, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say you're in a marriage and one party no longer feels to be in love with the other. are we now in or out of harmony with what appears to be God's design in terms of having sex? Out of harmony. It doesn't matter whether they're married or got a piece of paper or a certificate that says they're married or anything like that, does it? They're now out of harmony with the original design. It would not be appropriate for them ethically or morally to continue to have sex with their partner while they're not in love with them. Can you see that? Now that changes some complexions about relationships, doesn't it, if we look at things in that way. What say, I would take things to a further extreme, but all I'm doing at this point is actually presenting from the human experiment what we can gather. And we don't even have to experiment ourselves with this because, you know, this is the human experiment that's been going on for thousands of years. You amalgamate all of those particular things from thousands of years and you get a very, very good idea of what was the underlying design in the intention, the underlying intention in the design. So this being the case, let's say one of the party, of the couple who are having sex, don't want to have children. Well, is it out of harmony? Are you sure?
Ahí alguien les dice sí y él dice, ¿está segura?
Do you want to use the mic when we make these comments? Everyone at the moment, if I just say to the camera, everyone at the moment is going,
Que está bromeando con eso, ¿no? Todo el mundo en este momento está como dudando así.
And they're coming up with ideas.
I feel that God doesn't, you know, want us to constantly have child after child, you know, necessarily. No, maybe. But if we've got free will, and if one person wants to have a child, or the other was open to getting pregnant, but the other one definitely doesn't want to have a child, then I feel that those emotions maybe need to be worked through before.
Yes, so
having sex again.
there is now an ethical problem, is there not? Yes, can you see the ethical problem? One party, maybe the wife wants to have a child, the other party, maybe the husband, does not want to have a child, and they're still engaging in sex where there's a potential of having a child. So now there is an ethical issue, yeah, for both parties, actually. Because you'd have to start asking yourself, well, you know, now it'd be different. There would be no ethical issue if both parties didn't want to have a child, would there?
No.
No. Because if both parties didn't want to have the child and they're having sex and they have some way of preventing the conception from occurring, then of course they're both in agreement and there's no ethical issue. It's still by mutual desire, mutual agreement. Yeah, so all those husbands out there who are going, please don't get pregnant, please don't get pregnant, when they have this sex with their wife who wants to get pregnant, need to have a look at their ethical relationship with their partner. And of course the wife needs to as well. If she knows that the husband's feeling that way, certainly.
Would you, it would be the same opposite, wouldn't it? So,
of course.
Like, why would you look at the emotions behind why you want to have a child as well?
Of course. You would always, obviously it's to do with them being loved. If you want the child.
A ver, un momento, porque es que esta es una pregunta del público que no se ha oído y es lo que él ha respondido. O sea, ella también tiene un problema, es al revés también, ella también, ético, porque sabe que su marido se está sintiendo así y lo está comunicando, ¿no? Y la siguiente pregunta es la que acaba de hacer esta persona.
To love you, now you're way out of harmony with some pretty major ethical issues, and also you're way out of harmony with morality with God. Because the whole reason why God created children was for God to love the children, not for the children to love God. We have
Vamos a volver a donde hace la pregunta.
We have the will be made. The choice, obviously, it's
Emotions are the same opposite, wouldn't it? So,
of course,
like, why would you look at your emotions behind why you want to have a child as well?
of course. You would always, obviously, it's to do with them being loved. If you want the child to love you, now you're way out of harmony with some pretty major ethical issues, and also you're way out of harmony with morality with God. Because the whole reason why God created children was for God to love the children, not for the children to love God. We have the will that we can exercise to not love God. And so therefore our own children, when we create them, are able to exercise their will to not love us if they want to. And they're able to do that. And if we expect them to love us, and many parents do, we are already out of harmony with the gift of love, and therefore out of harmony with morality. Yeah. Agree. Thanks.
AJ, with the God wanting us to be with one partner,
Yep.
and you were talking before about a couple that have fallen out of love, or
Yes.
is that talking about not moving on to another partner is okay?
Yes.
Oh, right. And so it's not. It's more or less having one partner at one time. Not,
Yes.
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 So the same with the same sex
Doesn't matter
relationship.
Same sex, different sex. Yeah. Same
Okay.
applies. As long as these
There's
mutual
not
issues.
multiple partners at the one time.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Thanks, mate.
Just you may not have touched on this yet, but about the talking about contraception.
Yeah.
So what is it about having sex because you're enjoying it and having the children? So that aspect of using some form of contraception.
Well, the reality.
Aquí dice alguna forma de contracepción. La pregunta es un poco así dubitativa del hombre. Es un poco.
Is that God designed us to have an internal contraceptive system. The reason why women ovulate is yet to be scientifically and medically examined as to why they ovulate when they don't want to have a child. And the reality is that it's all to do with emotions that they have from very, very young age, that they're not a woman yet until they have a child. And
Yeah.
And the reality is, if a woman does not ovulate, she can't get pregnant, right? So the reality is that we have the ability in our own bodies to control ovulation and also control menstruation for a woman, and therefore control pregnancy that way. A man also has the ability to prevent his sperm from ever entering the ejaculation, and in his own body. He doesn't, of course, because most men have the emotion that they want some progeny, in the sense that they want to create some kind of longevity because they feel that them by themselves is not enough, and they want some, evidence of their prowess, if you like. And so men have a whole group of emotions associated with themselves not being able to prevent a pregnancy. When the two set of emotions are properly utilised, there is no chance of a pregnancy actually occurring without, and I'm saying under normal circumstances, if the soul is not engaged, the body would not engage the process of conception. Now, of course, mankind hasn't ever experimented with that because they're not developed enough yet to even consider that as a concept. But that was the original intention of God's design.
So there's nothing wrong with desiring to have lots of sex with your partner without the necessity to have children or prevent having children.
Exactly. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. However, we need to look at the emotional reasons why we need to use contraception rather than that happen naturally.
Okay.
Yeah. So there are emotional reasons for both parties, for both the woman and the man.
Okay, Tom.
Yeah. Understand?
So, AJ, when we start dealing with those emotions of not feeling like a woman, like for myself, like because I haven't had a child, I feel like I'm not a real woman. I've touched a little bit into that.
Yeah.
So, in the long run, in the next few years, perhaps then my periods will get lighter. Like maybe they'll want to
stop.
go. Okay, so
well, once you deal with that a group of emotions, your periods will stop altogether. Your body won't even prepare itself for a pregnancy every month.
Wow.
Because that's what your body is doing.
I see that as a shock. If I don't get my period, it's sort of like, wow, then there must be something wrong. So
yeah, because you think you're pregnant.
Those fears.
But the reality is that once we deal with the group of emotions that cause these kind of pregnancies to occur, which are all to do with needing a child, wanting a child to love you. There's all sorts of emotions associated with why a woman is very open from a very young age to becoming pregnant, and why a man is very ready at a very young age to make a woman pregnant. There's a whole group of emotions associated with both the men and the women that need to be addressed. Once we address those particular emotions, you get to the point where you only become pregnant when you have a passionate desire to have a child.
That has to be with your soulmate.
And that would be under certain circumstances, which we can talk about soulmates, but at this point I'm only looking at the experience of mankind over an experimental period of time and what we can then assume based on what we've observed occur so far. Not even about what the future is. I'm talking about only about what we have observed has occurred historically. Does that make sense? So in this discussion, I'm not discussing the possibilities of what could occur. I'm discussing what has actually occurred and what that tells us about our design. Does everyone get that? Yeah. So what this tells us about our design is these particular things. If these particular things are in operation, then you will find that the sexual relationship will be very enjoyable and will be completely risk-free. Right? Now, that obviously then results in no pain. So you could put all of those things together and say that all results in no pain. And if it all results in no pain, then obviously it is a higher likelihood. We're not knowing for certain at this point because it's just an experiment that that we've carried out for many thousands of years. But there's a higher likelihood that these assumptions that we've now made about God and God's design of us with regard to sexual morality must be fairly true or fairly correct. Because we've had thousands of years to test it. It's become quite obvious that anything outside of that creates pain. Can you see that? And therefore, it becomes obvious that from a sexual perspective, these particular things must be a part of what you would call God's sexual morality. Now, as you get closer and closer to God, you realise that there's other things involved in it as well. In fact, you'll find that there's a soulmate, there's this design issue of the other half of yourself, and there's a lot of other things that are involved in it. But you might not know that at the beginning of any experiment, right? All we can do from all of these experiments that man has done over hundreds of and thousands of years is to add together the results and can compare them to what must be moral, if that makes sense. Yeah?
I feel I'm engaged in an experiment.
Yeah.
And so I want to say something and ask something that's probably fairly contentious.
Yeah.
I feel it's immoral to have sex with anyone but your soulmate.
Yeah.
And I feel that true love cannot be present. This is my question, though. I'm not sure. I'm still experimenting.
Yeah.
But I don't feel that love, and I mean love, not barter or a sharing of addiction in a relationship, will not be truly present in a sexual way, in its sexual expression, unless I'm with my soulmate. Is that true?
Well, that is a truth, yes, but it's not yet a truth that mankind generally has discovered.
No, I understand that. I'm sorry if I'm taking away from that. Yeah.
So, no, I agree completely. With what you're saying,
yeah.
As you know.
Well, I wasn't sure on the second bit about the love.
I agree completely with everything you're saying, as you know. But it's not what man's discovered.
No.
So if we look just generally through the mankind's experience, humankind's experience over thousands of years, we've at least discovered this.
And on my feelings, if we engage that with sincerity, we would soon discover that last bit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We would get to the point where we find only one partner with whom we can have sex. Whether they wanted to have sex with us or not becomes immaterial. And if they don't want to, then we don't finish up wanting sex with anyone else. So we get to that point as we develop. But at this stage, most of mankind are not at that developed place, but they have at least worked out these things. Yeah. And so therefore we can then presume that these things must be a part of God's morality. Unless we get some further experimentation that proves otherwise. And this is the issue that we have with morality, is that we are going to have to examine it through the eyes of some kind of experiment. Because unless we are connected with God, we are not going to know God's desire. Right? And so therefore we're going to have to experiment. The faster way, of course, to deal with this issue as to what is right with regard to sexual morality is to actually connect to God. Because when you connect to God, very, very rapidly you sort out the issues. Oh, I feel bad. If I have sex with anyone other than my soulmate, so straight away that means it must be God's intention. I feel bad if even with my soulmate, love's not present. So therefore I can't have sex if love's not present, even if it's with my soulmate. So it feels bad. So straight away I can feel that. All of these things, in fact, you can feel very rapidly once you connect with God directly. But I'm saying that we all on the planet have the choice to either connect with God or not, and that being the case, there must be a way to measure morality aside from the connection with God, and there is, and that is by examining through the experiment of the human condition what has resulted in pain and what has resulted in no pain. And then obviously the thing that is no pain is the intention of the design, which makes sense logically. Okay, is there any questions? When I do these intellectual reasonings, you still struggle with some of them. So, or do I say them so quickly that it's like, what did you say? What did you say? Is that what happens? Yeah. Sorry about that. It's just, it is so inbuilt inside of me that it's so easy to say without, and I understand that listening to it, sometimes you have to listen to it again and go, what was that again? What was that again? And so I get that process is a necessary process. So.
Can you talk a little bit more about connecting with God?
Sure, but I suppose you could say I've done that a lot in terms of the discussion. Have you seen the Way presentation, the one called The Way?
I haven't seen it, but I have heard it.
Yeah. And my suggestion is to watch that over and over, and because that's a lot about connection with God.
But you talked about the feeling. Yeah, it feels good or it feels bad.
Yes, what happens inside of you when you have released the emotions that cause any negative connotation to exist, negative feelings to exist inside of yourself, any fear-based feelings, in other words. So a lot of religions come at these morals, what they call morals, from a fear-based perspective. So I'm not coming at them from a fear-based perspective. All I'm saying here with these morals is that through the human condition and experiment, we have found that certain things cause pain and certain things don't. And in the process, we need to examine that openly and say, okay, these things don't seem to cause pain. These things don't seem to cause pain to anybody, children or the mutual partners involved. And so therefore, there's a high likelihood that that was our original design intention.
So we need to have an open heart to be able to feel.
Yes,
that.
now let's factor in God into this process. If God was factored into this process, what would happen is this. I would not need to look at anything that's happened to the human condition and experiment. So I could roll that out. And all I need to do is, number one, heal my relationship that's a P. Relationship with God. That's number one. When I heal my relationship with God, I can start to feel God. It's only when I heal that relationship that I can feel God. The way that I go about doing that is I also need to be involved in number two, which is healing my relationship with myself. Myself including the other half of myself, or the soulmate, right? Now, once I heal my relationship with God and I heal my relationship with myself and I focus on doing those two things only, I become very certain very quickly in that process of what is right for myself and what feels wrong for myself. Everyone gets that? So, and the reason why I do is I can feel what is painful and what is not. And so I then know very, very quickly what is right and what is wrong without having to look at the experiments that other people have done. Right? I don't need to do that doing this. But in this discussion of morality, I've been suggesting that if we can't do that, we still have these ways of determining what is right and wrong by looking at the human experiment. So we can't sit down and go, I'm not connected with God and I'm not connected with myself, so I don't really know what the truth is. It's not true. You can look at the human experiment and see through the pain in the human experiment where the truth is. You don't even have to be connected to anything to do that. You can just sit back and say, I'm not connected to God, I'm not connected to myself, but you can still look and you can still see what obviously is right in the sense of what our original design intention was to be, and what is wrong in the sense of what is outside of our design parameters. Okay? When you do this, heal your relationship with God and heal your relationship with yourself, you don't need to examine the human condition over thousands of years, but you will not only this will not only result in you knowing the same thing as the thousands of years of experiments demonstrate, but you'll know some more additional things. And one of the additional things you'll know is that soulmates exist. And once I am open to my soulmate, I cannot be open to anyone else. That's one of the things you discover through that process. But if you decide not to heal your relationship with yourself or heal your relationship with God, there is still a means of determining what our original design parameters are that cause the least pain. Does that make sense to everyone? So we can't use the excuse, but I'm not connected with God or I'm not connected with myself, so therefore I do not know. Because the reality is, if we examine the human condition, we can easily find out. In that other people have made the experiments for us. Yes.
With the healing,
Yep.
can you go to someone to walk you, support you, hold your hand through your own process, or would you prefer it that each individual person does it on their own?
Well, initially you can go through, getting somebody to hold your hand through the process, but they're not going to be able to hold you through the entire process, because part of the process is letting go of their hand and having to do it on your own. So while it might be good for you to begin the process by having someone hold your hand and educate you and show you what to do and all those kind of things, sooner or later you're going to have to stand on your own 2 feet. That's the part of growing up, and that's also a part of healing your relationship with yourself. And so in the end, you're going to have to, whoever's holding your hand, at some point in the future, you're going to have to be willing to let their hand go so that you can complete the process. Now, what I personally find is the earlier you can learn to let somebody else's hand go, but still continue the process, usually the faster you go on the process. Because while you got hold of their hand, you're now attached yourself to their will, and you've now attached yourself to what they do in return. So you're still in some kind of addiction with the other person. And unless you let go of that, you're not going to fully be in this connection with God. So, but there is some advantages right at the beginning in doing that, because you need to be educated, you need to be shown, you need to be taught, you need to, learn how to do these things. And that requires somebody who is in front of you showing you what to do. And so this is why in the spirit world there's like literally millions and millions of spirits who are showing other spirits what to do, but they don't hold their hand for the entire journey. They let go of the hand, and the person becomes more and more self-responsible. And as soon as you become at one with God, actually at that time, you are now completely self-responsible. So you do not need to hold the hand of another in order to reach the condition of abundance with God. Yeah. Good question. All right, so if I heal those 2 things, and I won't discuss in this discussion how to heal them, I'll just say that if I do heal them, then I can determine, because of my relationship with God and myself now that's established completely, I can determine now what God's morality is on all sorts of issues, not just sexual morality, but all sorts of issues of morality. Let's look at some other issues of morality that don't involve sex, but rather involve what happens.
Bueno, entonces, si te parece, lo que nos queda para que el siguiente otro vídeo no sea tampoco muy breve, pues nos quedarían temas sobre decir verdad, que creo que aún no hemos visto, y esto que entra aquí del robo, y una parte final sobre los medios de comunicación. Y así centramos en el tema sexual, por ejemplo.
Ok.
Que aquí, bueno, antes de que comentes, porque el tema tú eres mujer, te estás más sensibilizada obviamente con el tema de toda la presión que hay, y ya no digamos la que observas en los niños a tu alrededor sobre el tema de la regla, que no se me olvide comentar este tema tan gracioso que yo creo que son pocos en este mismo año o en el siguiente, cuando en esos talleres tan bonitos de Grecia sobre la relación sexual y todo eso, y el estado de sueño, creo que también ese es por esa época, Mary expresa cómo por la noche en el cuerpo espiritual ella en realidad estaba relacionándose energético, sexualmente, en realidad con muchas personas, un poco fuera de la máscara. Y fíjate aquí cómo honestamente Mary está diciendo que está experimentando todavía con ese tema, ¿no? O sea, ella está aquí, por lo menos desde la máscara intelectual, reconoce que, bueno, está experimentando con el tema de los temas. Ha hablado de el amor tiene que estar presente en la relación para sentirse bien. Bueno, vemos cómo están ahí, pues, muy conscientes de esto, y como que es un preludio de las tomas de conciencia que luego parece que iban a pasar, porque son después. Porque Miller tenía esa intuición clara, sabía claramente que por las noches, pues ella, como tenía muchas cosas de la máscara por deshacer, pues él sabía que,
Claro.
bueno, ¿Te acuerdas de
Sí, en el video anterior que hablábamos hace un rato de Elvira, bueno, ahora cuando lo titules, que estaba focalizado principalmente en ese aspecto, ¿no? De lo que es la relación con el otro, las relaciones personales, la ira, y cómo se proyecta, e incluso percibo, se desmitifica lo que llamamos el alma gemela, un poco como que nos pasa con todo, ¿no? Desmitificando a Dios, desmitificando la fe, al conocer la verdad divina, esta idea de que el alma gemela es romantizada, idílica, no incluye todos estos aspectos de procesamiento personal a lo que conlleva justamente a asumir la responsabilidad, un poco lo que dice al final, de tu propio proceso, de tu relación y, bueno, de tu relación con Dios. Él a lo último aclara que si fuera esa en primer orden, las otras por efecto van a replicar también la misma armonía, pero que de alguna forma, claro, vivirla así experimentando también implica parte de la sanación de la pareja. De eso yo siento muy profundamente cómo puede, viste que Elvira, bueno, sí o sí me remonto al otro video, no sé si cuando pongan las personas que escuchen este video van a asociar ambas, porque claro, para mí están vinculados en este sentido de que como alma, de poder en ese momento que AJ, al que vos mencionás, contempla y pone como, o sea, declara, pone honestamente esa verdad disponible para que Mary asuma lo que le corresponde respecto a las acciones que ella estaba emprendiendo en estado de sueño. Y que es parte de la pareja, siento que también lo deja claro con Elvira, bueno, si bien uno puede iniciar una pareja en función de una adicción o de un trueque, también al mismo tiempo el proceso de sanación y de encontrarse con la oportunidad de atravesar la emoción que subyace a ese comportamiento, también puede ser hecho en pareja, no necesariamente implica separarse o dejarse.
Sí, no, hemos visto en el anterior ese tema, sí.
Ujú.
Entonces sería
Que
egoísta.
incluso él lo dice, yo he abierto mi corazón, dice en el anterior, Mary aún no lo ha hecho y están compartiendo en pareja, bueno, entonces él dice, bueno, entra y sale del taller para sentir todo eso que generalmente no está contemplado, siento yo, como que lo vemos como algo acabado, o sea, ya nos casamos, estamos comprometidos, como que es una versión, claro, es tu versión, mi versión, como que ya no hay un proceso, por eso comienzan en paralelo a vivirse otras vidas, es porque ya es como que tengo una versión oficial, me he casado con este hombre, recuerdo que un día Eloísa en el ciclo de las adicciones también dijo, ¿no? Pero después ando escaneando y buscando otra porque ya esta relación no me satisface y claro, la fachada se encarga de crear esa vida en paralelo y voy ocultando todo lo que siento.
Bueno, entonces ya hemos visto que si quieres compartir el tema de la regla que llamamos mucho por aquí, ahora ya se estaba llamando de muchas maneras, el periodo que llamáis más allí, la presión que hay y la industria de venta de fármacos para que las niñas tengan la regla, es una cosa increíble, ¿no?
Claro, en principio, como decía al comenzar, como no leo tampoco las transcripciones antes, justamente, entonces me quedo sumamente sorprendida e involucrada en este proceso. Yo, por ejemplo, tengo la ligadura de trompas, que también es una mutilación, que también va en contra del diseño, que también obedece a la desobediencia, sería en este caso, en cuanto a no sé quién soy, no sé cómo funciono, todo esto, ¿no? Que ahora entiendo que lo ofrece tan claramente eh, a J, que claro, si uno estuviera involucrado, heredamos esta actitud de autosuficiencia y lo que hicimos fue ir en contra de todo, ¿no? Y completamente. Y bueno, parte de eso...
Tecnificamos la desobediencia, ¿no? Que ahora va a ver
Claro.
si salimos, porque Sí, con tanta tecnología.
Claro, incluso se considera, por ejemplo, como yo siento, porque ya es como que, no sé cómo explicarte, sano, te diré, como que la mejor opción, por decirte, en este caso, la ligadura, y es sumamente, ahora me doy cuenta, pero recién ahora, en este momento, de lo que implica, ¿no? Como la arrogancia, como cualquier otra decisión que tomamos, que ahora está muy de moda esto de que mi cuerpo es mío. Em, y bueno, con los abortos, contra el alma, contra los niños, que es justamente Dios lo deja claro, sobre qué tenemos autoridad, cuando conocemos el concepto de autoridad, desde la perspectiva y la ley de Dios, y sobre qué tiene autoridad Él. Y ahí nosotros nos involucramos en lo que no tenemos autoridad, que son los niños, o sea, son sus hijos. Entonces, directamente, fíjate hasta dónde llega nuestra arrogancia, ¿no? Con el tema del aborto, ya en este caso, yo supuestamente sería como, por eso digo, menos pecaminoso, digo supuestamente porque hay que ver todo lo que hay detrás, la verdadera intención, como hablaban hoy de las armas, lo que subyace al hecho de que yo no quiera tener hijos. Pero bueno, para no salirme mucho de eso, decía al principio, con todo este aparato de la anticoncepción, que se considera amoroso, cómo también se pone al servicio de la madurez, la exigencia de que la mujer cumpla con ese rol, porque sí, conozco el caso de una niña que no ovula, como la delgadez extrema está asociada desde el punto de vista biológico, y es un poco lo que dice él cuando Mary habla del verdadero amor y de que tendríamos sexo únicamente con la pareja, y bueno, y que no se ha sometido a un experimento científico en la Tierra válido, por lo tanto, para nosotros no hemos descubierto eso todavía porque no estamos involucrados desde el alma. Y claro, entonces se considera que lo que se debe hacer es promover desde la medicina y la ciencia, o sea, eso es una anomalía, a eso voy.
Pero
Es
es
una anomalía.
totalmente pseudocientífico, porque ven que la niña está delgada y ven que no ovula y dicen, no, pues una cosa tiene que estar relacionada con la otra y no tiene por qué.
Totalmente. Y no solo que le proveen de anticonceptivos, porque tiene que supuestamente generarse el ciclo, digamos, como que se está forzando, es como cuando forzas la voluntad, digamos, pero además, por ejemplo, bueno, la delgadez extrema implica que debe engordar. Claro, no está ovulando porque la delgadez extrema, porque entonces tiene que aumentar. Como tiene que aumentar de peso, y acá hay también toda otra trama de relación, su relación con la comida, y también tiene conflicto con la madre. O sea, obviamente que quienes más un poco conocemos, madre, comida, está asociado a ese conflicto, porque no hay una anorexia, pero sí hay un desorden alimentario, come a deshora, todo un tema, ¿no? Bueno, muy potenciado con este aislamiento, porque se vieron en la circunstancia de tener que convivir, así que aflora todo esto, pero tiene un trasfondo sumamente profundo y de mucho dolor en este momento, porque justamente lo que dice la chica que no puede tener hijos, siento que soy menos mujer. Y en una discusión de esta niña con su mamá, le dijo una cosa más en la que he fracasado, porque tiene otras cuestiones de fondo. Entonces, claro, imagínate el equipaje que se le...
La fachada de autocastigo es horrible.
Exacto, exacto, totalmente. Asume como una discapacidad o incompetencia, básicamente.
O sea, y la presión es increíble de todo el sistema y de todas las mujeres también, para que tengan la regla, ¿no?
Sí, sí, y que incluso te hablo de personas que, por decir, una excelente ginecóloga la que acompaña, o sea, que tienen trayectoria, que, bueno, está de más decirlo, pero te quiero decir que aún así, con una buena obra social, que un poco lo que hablábamos ayer, antes de ayer, el tema de la obra social, como que con un respaldo, o sea, que accede no estoy hablando de la maquinaria estatal únicamente, sino del ámbito privado, y aún así no es que pase por ahí la cosa es la misma perspectiva, es exactamente lo mismo, con la misma lógica.
Mm.
Aún así no lo vemos.
Es lo que nos hemos acostumbrado a esta normalidad que es absolutamente criminal de vernos como un ganado, pero no nos damos cuenta de que estamos haciendo eso. Pero es totalmente como el ganado, o sea, es tratar a los niños dándoles lo mismo que se les da a las vacas, ¿no? Pues muchos fármacos, venga, tienen que comer, venga.
Exacto, sí, exacto, así, con la misma lógica que ponemos a las gallinas a producir 10.000 huevos para vender, sí, exactamente, así es.
Cuando vemos esta sorpresa de la verdad divina, ¿no? Que podríamos haber tenido alguna intuición, porque el alma, somos el alma, entonces es lo más grande. Podríamos haber tenido alguna intuición en algún embarazo de decir, no, pues realmente hay una decisión más allá de lo físico que permite o no la concepción. Eso lo ha notado mucha gente. O sea, no nos inventamos nada, pero...
Claro, porque cuando desanda, incluso, no me acuerdo, el chico que es calvo, que habló, que dice, bueno, si está hecho para disfrutar, ¿qué pasa con el hecho de no querer usar?
Sí, se te ha cortado. El no querer.
Deseo honesto, ¿no?
Se ha
Y me
cortado.
sorprendió también, Iván, en este caso.
¿Me oyes?
Hola,
Se ha cortado.
hola.
Cuando hablabas del chico, ¿me oyes?
Ah, sí, ahora sí te oyo. Sí,
Es que desde el momento que has hablado del chico calvo, cuando decías el no querer o no sé qué, a esa pregunta, eso no se ha oído nada de nada. Y entonces, ahora coméntalo si te acuerdas de lo que estabas diciendo, porque ha habido como 5 segundos. Y eso, la pregunta de ese chico estaba ahí como cortadillo, reticente y por eso su pregunta era tan liosa. Y luego ya
ya
él
que todas.
lo ha mostrado.
Hola, se corta.
Hola.
Mis espíritus que están, sí, con la ira acá, y yo todas las heridas abiertas.
Ya han despertado, ya es demasiado para ellos, todo este tema de la
Sí, sí, tengo, claro, con mi abuela con violación y mi mamá vergüenza sexual, ya está haciendo gordo.
Sí, ya es que
Tanta verdad.
la niña de la que hablas además es como que estaba haciendo de medium en parte con tu abuela, o sea que es una cosa de locos. O sea,
Sí,
muy clara la influencia de espíritus y las capacidades de los niños
está muy clara.
y la distorsión, porque sería natural.
Aparte,
La niña está mostrando una cosa natural, que es, no, es que si yo no quiero tener hijos, no tengo por qué tener la regla.
exactamente. Sí, sí. Es más, Iván, en toda estaría, sin entrar yo en su historia, estaría teniendo la oportunidad de atestiguar un poco el fundamento de su decisión. Está perfectamente clara.
O por lo menos ya
Realmente
tienes como
bien.
hipótesis, no es nada dogmático. O sea, esto nos lo presenta, mira, ahora mismo tenemos una hipótesis para por qué no tiene la regla.
Ujú.
Hay que estar abiertos, si somos verdaderamente científicos, hay que abrirse a todo.
Sí,
La mentalidad es esa, no la de los médicos, normalmente que están para recetar cosas muchas veces. Entonces, estabas diciendo algo, Isa, y tus espíritus han cortado, no sé si te puedes acordar, con el tema del chico.
no, estaba diciendo lo fundamental que me parece que nosotros tenemos hijos, y estaría muy relacionado también con esta historia que estamos compartiendo, para que nos amen. Me pareció esencial en esa lógica muy
Sí,
propia de la descendencia, como para garantizar, o sea, ya hay un contrato. Entonces, claro, que Dios no tiene sus hijos, y ahí volvemos a la moral, no tiene con ese propósito, porque Dios no necesita que lo amemos y cambia totalmente el sentido de la procreación, porque vaya que equipaje con el que cargamos a los hijos, y un poco lo que yo hablaba justamente ayer era que yo se lo decía a la mamá, aceptá que puede no amarte, porque justamente la expresión de ella con su mamá es que la aborrece. Entonces, claro, si yo digo, no tener un hijo para que después sufra la relación, ¿se entiende? Es maravilloso poder verlo así, porque no se estaría hablando de un hostigamiento, sino de una cuestión de libertad. O sea,
Sí, lo más
de
básico.
amor, realmente. De amor.
Sí, que no es,
Porque
es
yo
una,
te amo,
es una demostración súper enorme y lo que quizá la más visible de lo que significa habernos puesto como Dios. Es decir, nos ponemos como Dios en el sentido de que más que Dios, porque Dios precisamente estamos como estamos porque elegimos apartarnos, Amón y Amán, las primeras almas, no recibir amor divino para ahondar en la relación y entonces elegimos apartarnos, pero nosotros por contra, en vez de como hizo Dios de permitir que sus hijos no le amen, por contra nosotros ahora reclamamos, para ahondar más todavía en el infierno, reclamamos contra el libre albedrío de nuestras creaciones, por así decirlas, que no son nuestras, les reclamamos que hagan lo que un Dios no reclama de sus hijos. Dios no reclama de sus hijos que le amen, claro. Entonces esto hay mucho que sentir ahí, ¿sí?
claro, porque ella incluso tiene 2 hermanos que tienen distintos grados de autismo. Entonces, imagínate, después de los 5 años, ella tiene los hermanos. Estos hermanos, en el devenir, claro, en el crecimiento, van manifestando estas, entre comillas, limitaciones, que más que tiene que ver con el cuerpo físico, pero que revelan el cuerpo físico, que incluye al energético, pero que revelan la condición del alma. Cuando uno comprende que están reflejando las heridas de ambos padres, imagínate, toda el alma en esa red, digamos, en esa red, y ella comprendiendo desde el alma todo lo que implica, porque justamente la experiencia y la atención que se da en el ámbito de la casa, del hogar, está relacionada con eso, y claro, uno dice, tener hijos para así no, digamos, como que no quiero, y sin embargo, se ve como enfrentado, confrontada a resolver eso, o sea, a responder, a comer porque tiene que comer, a comer determinada cosa porque tiene que engordar, y todo absolutamente en desarmonía. Y creemos que estamos haciendo bien, o sea, que es mi deber de madre, mi responsabilidad, ordenar este desorden. Qué ceguera, ¿no? Qué nivel de distorsión adquiere toda la circunstancia, y cuánto dolor, porque realmente es como decía él, si hay dolor, no es amoroso, es así, no es de Dios. Pues no se justifica pasar por esa circunstancia, en ninguno de los casos. Y la obligación de amar, porque bueno, justamente la expresión que tiene de aborrecimiento, que se la hace saber a su mamá y que termina siendo una cuestión honesta de pronto, claro, y el dolor que provoca en uno, que no se nos quiera, revela quizás el propósito por el que ella está aquí, capaz vino con ese deseo de que me amen y no está resultando, y por lo tanto, claro.
Oye, tengo que ir al servicio un momento y ahora seguimos un poquillo más. Si te parece.
Sí, sí, totalmente. Te escucho claro, te espero.
Bueno,
Bueno, como vemos hasta dónde llega y se extiende, ¿no? Lo de la moral y la ética, y que todo está intrínsecamente vinculado.
sí, lo del el propósito de las actitudes subyacentes cuando se tienen sexo, no hay una mentalización, no estamos mentalizados sobre eso. Y fíjate que la educación sexual debería ser eso, ¿no? Y aquí tienen esta frase cuando la dice Miller: si los hijos surgen como resultado, entonces son amados, la pone en plan lógico, es decir, o sea, como otra de esas características
Sí,
compositivas, o sea, cuando los resultados de tener, como lo he dicho, aspectos positivos de la relación sexual, o sea, cuando hay esa actitud y ese deseo de cuidar esto, ¿no? O sea, de tener claridad en torno a eso. A esta, sí que es una expresión lógica simplemente. O sea, dice, no, vamos a ver, ¿estamos con este pensamiento o no? El pensamiento es, si los hijos van a surgir, entonces los vamos a querer. Entonces, ya simplemente no hay autoconsciencia en los dos miembros de ninguna persona, ¿no? Que se relacionen sexualmente. En nuestras vidas no ha habido mucha autoconsciencia de eso. Muchos hemos cambiado de relaciones y precisamente es esto, ¿no? El problema. Que vas acumulando inconscientemente todos los factores que surgen aquí y muchos más que separan del alma de la otra persona. Porque no estás.
y
Sí.
cómo se instala en el entorno, Iván, hasta qué punto termina siendo parte, en un momento habla de la atmósfera, ¿no es cierto? Hay que se dan, que se da de manera constante y cómo ya, como hablaba él, a ver, ¿en cuál era de los videos? Bueno, que a los 2 años ya comienzan esa rebelión, que ya comienza la fachada, que ya se hereda y que se instala en el entorno y que de alguna forma comienza a co-crear estas realidades que vemos, por eso tiene esa cuestión masiva, de como que todo funciona así, porque nos cuesta mucho comprender, siento yo, la idea de normalidad, un poco que también se ve en este taller, ¿no? Porque lo tomamos como normal, porque todo el mundo, como que funciona en todo el mundo, o sea, la ciencia discutiría eso, ¿no? De que la muestra, viste que el método científico que busca, bueno, la muestra y el indicador respalda de que esto es así.
Claro,
Así funciona.
es un círculo vicioso enorme. Todo el mundo tiene la regla, entonces todo el mundo es natural y es lo que dices.
Claro, sí. Entonces, como ahora que alguien descabelladamente salga a decir que yo lo puedo manejar, que es mi deseo, que con el deseo estoy moviendo el mundo y el universo, es como que, claro, uno se ríe, pero es que es así. Lo que pasa es que estamos deseando en desarmonía. Los hijos vienen con un contrato. Estamos esto de la procreación y el hecho de tener, o sea, desconocer quiénes somos básicamente y cómo funcionamos. Entonces, y el aparato, así como sale ahora, digamos, bueno, sale un virus y sale el aparato a luchar, bueno, lo mismo, o sea, en oposición a lo que está diciendo la ley, porque surgen todas las circunstancias para que podamos darnos cuenta, y lo que hacemos ante cada oportunidad es tapar la verdad. Y bueno, acá esto, y lo tomamos incluso porque la educación sexual, por ejemplo, que promueve, pero ni siquiera contempla el amor de ninguna forma, no incluye, hablo de las escuelas, que es ley en Argentina, es ley, y reparte los profilácticos y incluso los anticonceptivos y los parches, o sea, un montón de métodos que haya para, pero hablo de nuevo como esta supuesta intervención en armonía, entre comillas, con la desarmonía?
En armonía con lo que sería lo científico, el materialismo ambiente, la atmósfera que has dicho es una atmósfera materialista. Y fíjate que si miras la oración del amor divino, la ciencia está incluida muchas veces porque es materialismo chabacano y falso, está incluida en tentaciones de la carne. Cuando la oración nos habla de esa frase que nos suena tan a colegio de monjas, las tentaciones de la carne, la ciencia es una de las tentaciones de la carne. O sea, los presupuestos y los deseos, las emociones que hay, que son pseudocientíficas, que inspiran eso de creernos todos juntos, no, como todo el mundo tiene la regla, pues es lo científico y lo natural, pues es constatar que el ser humano es como las mujeres tienen la regla, no. Pues eso, la ciencia es una de las tentaciones de la carne, o sea, para que veamos, porque es una adicción, o sea, está cubriendo las adicciones, es una adicción más para cubrir esa adicción emocional a no sentir las penas más profundas, sobre todo, por ejemplo, las relativas a la relación con Dios y con uno mismo, claro, como alma. Entonces, qué claro está, ¿no? No sé si me has oído, ahora yo no te oigo. No te oigo. No sé si tienes el micrófono. Algo pasa con los desencarnados. A ver si. Tengo un mensaje.